Skeers. I'm 51 years old and I'm a chemistry professor. So I'm in the Keck Science Department. I've been here for 20 years. Oh, this is my 20th year, which sounds crazy to me. And prior to that, I was a postdoc at MIT, and prior to that, I was a graduate student at the University of Washington. I do. I have 3 daughters. My eldest is 16. My middle is 13, about to have a birthday, and I have an 11-year-old as well. Yes, so I did. I was here for all 3 of my children. So when I had my first daughter, there was no policy, maternity leave policy at CMC, which runs our benefits. So that was kind of interesting. I had to navigate how to get time off. So I took off, let's see, I had her in January. So I gave my finals in the fall, and I did like busy work in January, and then I had her right at the start of the spring semester, and I took the entire spring semester off. I did have research students, so I came in and met with them every Friday. So I kept my thesis students going. And then I came back to work the following fall. So I had the whole semester in summer with my first daughter. My second daughter, there was a policy in place, so that was much easier. I had her the day of my final in the fall, so somebody else had to give my final, but I knew it could happen, so I had it ready, and I called a colleague and said, okay, I'm in labor, you're gonna have to give my test. She brought the exams to the hospital so I could grade them there. And then I finished up that semester and I took the spring off. And then with my third daughter, I was told that I wasn't allowed to have a third leave because Claremont McKenna only allowed you to have 2 children. I kind of made a fit and said that wasn't in the faculty policy, and they said, well, it will be, and I said, yeah, well, I'm a pre-existing condition, so I am the last person to get a third parental leave from CMC, so I did. But with her, she was born in June, and we were really shorthanded here in Keck, and so rather than take the whole semester off, I had the summer off, and I taught 1 class in the fall, so I took a partial leave, and so I could teach, and by then I knew my babysitter really well, and I was more comfortable at having a kid come back here earlier. So yes, I took leaves with all of them. My husband only got the 2 weeks of, well, with the first 2, he was working with a company, and he got the 2 weeks, and actually I think he probably took a week. Like, he took the federally mandated, but he was so busy that his work was kind of like, we need you. And then with my third, he was running his own business at the time, and he had just started it, so he could work from home, and but he had to get things done because he just started a company, so he didn't really have a formal leave, but he was at least more around than he was for the first time. I was not required to. And in fact, I think they had a hard time figuring out what to do with my first one because they had decided there was a policy and I was going to be granted leave, and the department here kept not hiring somebody for the spring, and I kept saying, I'm not going to be here in the spring, like, who's going to cover my classes? And the chair at the time said, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and I was, shocked. I was like, we've already crossed the bridge, like, you're going to have to cover these classes. And they just were like, but they did. So nobody made me, and nobody said I couldn't. And I would say that the chemistry discipline was very supportive of letting me take my leave, but they just didn't know how to handle it at the time. We've gotten much better at hiring people to teach for 1 class or whatever, but at that time it was kind of unheard of, and so it did kind of startle them. That's a really complex one. I was very concerned prior to having my daughter what would happen if I got pregnant while a tenure-track faculty member. I was concerned I would not get tenure. And it wasn't because anyone in particular had done it or there was a woman who'd had a child and not gotten tenure. It was that when I talked about having kids, people kept saying, well, don't do that till you have tenure. Don't do that till you have tenure. They're going to get rid of you if you do that before you have tenure. And I don't think there was evidence of that, but people were afraid of it, so that had me afraid. And ultimately I had to decide, like, I was already 32 when I got here, and so I kind of decided, well, if they're gonna fire me over having children, this isn't a place I wanna be, so I'm just gonna live my life and hope it works out. And it did. So it wasn't that anybody made me feel that way, and oddly enough, in some ways, which is really strange, it probably doesn't fit in your data well, prior to having children, I think my male colleagues had more trouble with me, and in some way, being like a strong, confident woman, they didn't know what to do with me. But as soon as I had children, it was like, oh, you're like my wife, you raise children. And so then all of a sudden I was easier for them to kind of figure out what kind of beast was I. And I think it weirdly helped my relationship with my male colleagues. Surprising, but it worked, so. I do. I've read the book. I've taught a core class where we cover it, so absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine any parent who doesn't think they have a second shift, right? So I am pretty much the primary caregiver. Because my husband's job, he is the owner of the company and the main person. Like he has to drop everything if a meeting comes up. And I can make my schedule such that I can be the one to pick up the kids or start later. Like I used to always teach the 8 a.m. class, and I liked teaching night lab. I stopped doing that when I had kids because I had to take them to daycare, and I needed to be home, and so I had to rearrange my schedule to accommodate that. I would make arrangements to get my children from here to wherever they needed to be next, and then have to come back to work, and then have to go home and cook. So absolutely, there's no doubt that once you have children, you have a second shift. I don't know how you avoid that. Super aware because he's married to me. We had all these conversations before we had kids. So he's very aware, and actually I think he doesn't perpetuate. He does his best to do his share. He will change his meeting schedule now, especially now that he's established. Like when the babies were little, he just started his company and he had to be like very responsive. Now he's the one who rearranges his schedule so that he can run out at noon and pick up the kids, and I don't have to. And he does his fair share of chores. Like when the kids were little, I nursed, so there wasn't much he could do about getting up in the middle of the night and feeding them. That was kind of my job because I wanted to do that. But he was, the one who would get up, change the diaper, bring me a clean baby to nurse. Like when I was done, he'd be the one to put the baby back to bed. And he cooks and he cleans, and he knows that he kind of has to. He wasn't raised that way though. He was raised in a very traditional male family, and his father really wasn't into me initially because he wanted him to marry a wifey, and I wasn't going to be that. And so it was, when we first got married, it was a lot of retraining, because he never had to make his own bed or wash a dish or do laundry because mom did that. She didn't work, and that's women's work. But he knew, as we were dating, I was already debunking all of those myths, and he's learned to do it all. That's interesting, just the way it's worded. I know my family's the most valuable thing, and that was a choice I made before having kids. I knew that when I had kids, I wanted to be a really active, participating parent. I didn't want to hire other people to do all that stuff. I didn't want to live in nanny. I didn't want all of those things that people do that make work easier. And I knew that it was going to affect my work, but I felt like I'm a really good teacher in my heart. I believe in it, and I think I can balance it. So it didn't change what was important to me. My job is important to me. My career is important to me. I always knew that I would come back to work. I didn't spend that long in grad school not to have a career. But even knowing that, I do know that there's consequences and there's a lot of stress involved there are times when I'm not the best teacher I could be. I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be because I've devoted some time to my family and I didn't get something done. Or there are times when I've had to miss things that my kids are doing, and I want to be there with them, but I need to be here. So there are days when I feel like I don't do either very well, right? So I'm hard on myself. I'm I'm not a good enough mom, and I'm not enough good enough professor. Why am I doing both of these? And then there are other times when I think, you know what, I do pretty good, and it's really hard. I don't believe in this balance thing. There's no such thing as balance. There's some days when one has to have more, and some days when the others. I kind of learned you just find where it is and you work with it. So most days I'm pretty fair to myself now. Maybe it's because I've been a mom a long time and my kids are turning out pretty okay. So not being there for everything hasn't ruined them. Yeah. So it's really hard for me to come in and do experiments in the middle of the night and change samples, and so some of the science research just takes weird hours, and that can be really hard. So when my kids were little, I really kind of changed my research track in some ways. I had a project I was really interested in, but the hours of that sort of project were just not going to be working for that, and the fact that I need to be in the lab with my students every time they're in there because of synthesis and safety, I kind of tacked away from that and went on to samples that were unlabeled samples that we could do DNA experiments that were different, that I wouldn't have to come in as night as much. And in some ways that has impacted me because the other kind of research that I had expertise in was more cutting edge maybe than what I'm doing now. So I kind of had to let that go, and that's okay, right? Like, it was never going to be Nobel laureate work, so it's okay. So yeah, it's changed the types of experiments I could do. It also has changed, you know, when you start thinking like, what do you want to do next? And so a lot of people have said, hey, don't you want to be a dean? Don't you want to think about? And for me, I don't even want to think about that until my kids are grown up. Like, I've done the chair of the faculty and I've enjoyed it, and I think leadership is great, and I think having women in leadership positions is fantastic. But for me, I'm not willing to have a job that doesn't have any flexibility and maybe has a lot more travel, because as a mom, I want to be at their thing. So that's affected my career. Like, I had to decide, like, did I want to spend more time doing those sorts of things and be okay with my kids being with somebody else, or did I want it? And I chose the kids. And I think we all have to decide for ourselves which of those works. I have a colleague that did the other and had her husband is like a stay-at-home dad. Travels a ton, he does all these things, and for her that's fine and that's great and it works for them, and I think that's wonderful. And I think, you know, you just within your own relationship and your own life, you have to figure out what's going to make you happy. Right. I think they are. Even though they're young, they have been from a really young age. So, little example, when my oldest was in preschool, right before their preschool graduation, they asked them what they wanted to be when they grow up, because they were going to say that at preschool graduation. And my daughter said a mom. And the principal was a little worried because I was career oriented, and she was like, you know, are you kind of upset that she wants to be a mom? And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. Like, she wants to be a mom. I must be doing a good job. And my daughter looks up at me and she goes, no. I want to be one of the good moms who shows up before nap time, not the ones that leave us here all day. And I was like, so she already understood that I couldn't be the mom that showed up. You know, she had to go to all-day preschool. And so I feel like they're really aware of what we're doing. They may not know it's called the second shift, but they're aware that we're trying to do multiple things. And now that they've gotten older, we talk about it. They know, like, my brother-in-law cooks and my sister does the dishes. Whereas in my house, I cook and my husband does the dishes. So when my sister was doing the dishes, my middle daughter, when she was like 6, said, why is that Ellen doing the daddy's job? And I thought that was so awesome, right? I've got a daughter who thinks dishes are daddy's job. So they get that there has to be some balance, and now that they're older, we do talk about it, you know, and I talk to them about career and family and, you know, what's hard and what's not. And like when they get mad at me for not being somewhere, then I have to explain to them, like, you know, it's a choice we have to make. And I think in the end, they're all really proud of me for what I do. And so that's cool too. And for myself, I never thought I couldn't do it all. And I know that's because of my mom, because I was raised by a single mother who raised 3 kids and had a job. And so she had to balance all this out. And so I thought, I have no excuse. Like, if I want to do this, I had a great role model, I'm going to do it. And so I think for my own kids, yeah, I've missed some of their events, but I've really shown them what's possible, and then they can choose for themselves. Ooh, that's a good one. I think the idea of telling younger generations what it is and making them aware of it, I think the biggest thing is we have to debunk the myth of the supermom. That, you know, you can have it all, but you've got to be perfect at everything, and this balance idea, and we put so much pressure on ourselves to be all of that and don't talk about the hard parts, right? So I think by labeling it the second shift, it's acknowledging that it is work. And it's okay for your family to be work. That doesn't mean, like, not work isn't always bad. Work is good. Work is worth something. So I think if we can educate younger people that it is a second shift, that they're choosing because of the quality of their life, they want both. I think we have to debunk this idea that either it's easy, because it's not, or that it's too hard, because it's not. It's just a matter of helping people evaluate their own needs and wants and desires and how they can balance that out. And then, of course, we just have to constantly be educating society that that's okay too, right? I think politicians do a terrible job, like women should be home raising kids, and that still seems to be a narrative that is so untrue. So we really have to have women getting the real narrative out of, like, no, most of us work, and many of us work because we love what we do and because we need the money. Some people work because they need the money and they don't love what they do, right? Some people work when they don't even need the money because they love what they do. And I think all of those, we as women need to be more accepting of each other, but we also need to get out there and make that narrative that there isn't one path for us, right? But we do need to be more accepting of each other. Like when you choose to be one way or another, don't be judging someone else for their other choice, because we're all different what we're gonna choose. And I respect my colleagues that decided to stay home. I respect my colleagues whose husbands are the ones that stay home. I respect my colleagues that are juggling the same way I do. I think we just all have to figure that out for ourselves.
All right, so